And so in today's presentation, Nick is going to give you some key takeaways and tips on developing a strong brand strategy. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Nick. See a full screen, it looks great.
All right, excellent. Well, welcome everybody to intro webinar number 8 on brand strategy. One of the things that I am not going to do today is that I will not be providing for you differences in label type designs or preferences, such as critter labels or art series or classical or concept labels or family and surname focuses, etc. But I want to refer to these as outworkings of targeting and the determination of who you are selling to as a priority over what you are selling. So let's get going here. The majority of our industry suffers much from romantic notions rather than focusing on hard data to make decisions. With the electronic age comes a host of terms. The new language many times is used without really understanding the separation of terms, and there's a great disconnect in communication between businesses because of it. With the use of the internet, we've become aware of terms like cookies and analytics. And with these terms, many of us have been introduced the concepts of target marketing as a critical component to consumer identification. Many of us in the small business world still struggle with understanding how to apply the information that we see, all these cool-looking analytics graphs. There's a management phrase that states, build a system of work and work that system. I'll focus here a little bit on the importance of developing a system to organize your contacts and build critical information about your contacts that is key to identifying them in a broad sense. What I mean by that is that everything about 99.9% of all of us is already known. I want to show you how to find out everything you need to know about your customers and then key in on them as categories of people in all markets across the U.S. and abroad. And why that's important is that without really knowing who your customers are, which I know has been reiterated time and time again in this webinar series, and the more you look at the DTC world, you'll hear it over and over again. You've got to get to know who your customers are, and you're going to hear all these new terms, psychographics and segmentation, etc. Historically, very few producers have designed branding or brands specifically to people groups. In what we'll discuss as segmentation and psychographics, the general designing ritual for the wine branding world is most often approached by handing off components of surrounding landscape or family crest or simply the family name, etc., to a graphic artist, and the artist is commissioned with the task of laying out multiple designs. There are varying levels of detail in each case, but very few identify an exact group they want to sell to by way of sophisticated algorithmic details, and design all elements of package, excluding product quality, that resonate specifically to that target. If you are not already in tune with this, today it will serve as an introduction. The saying that there are many ways to skin a cat is true in a sense, but it should always be qualified with a specific strategy of why we have decided to launch a product or business with specific strategy concerning the approach, pitch, and sale closure to specific customers. We'll talk about a few variations here today. The first topic is this fortune thinking, like a Fortune 100 company versus the romantic notions of the wine industry. And so I want to talk about reorienting for successful brand development. When I was in junior high school, my best friend, Henry Bustamante, wanted to be a rock star so bad he wore 10-inch tall platform shoes and carried his drumsticks in his back pocket. He thought that if he played the drums well, looked and acted the part, and played little gigs around the city, he would automatically be recognized and launched into stardom. Henry practiced until his hands bled, played very well, and in the end, he faded into the background. One of the greatest pieces of advice that has been given to me is to study the strategies of successful characters or businesses. And this is all about how we develop the branding focus, the approach to developing a single brand or brand within a portfolio. Well, my friend Henry loved the rock band Kiss, and other than the makeup, everything about Henry duplicated the look of that band. What Henry missed was that the makeup was a point of differentiation that allowed for faster recognition, a more powerful message for retailer merchandising, and the fact that these differences put this mediocre rock band, hope I'm not, hurting anyone's feelings out there, into a limelight of interviews, magazine covers, television appearances, every other thing that a rock star dreams of. The point of this is that Gene Simmons, the inventor, marketer, choreographer of this band, wasn't necessarily fixated on being a rock star. He was a businessman who researched methodologies of marketing differentiation that ended up selling over 100 million records for this band. Gene Simmons' accolades in business are tremendous. I suppose this is where I state the disclaimer of philosophy that I'm not really a proponent of this particular direction of philosophical content, but the focus of the business was not on the product, which had to be of super high quality according to the market demand, but it was the market brilliance of a man who was less focused on the fame of recognition as he was successful strategies to win the game. Unfortunately, succeeding in the music business is similar in many ways to the challenges of succeeding in the wine business. Both industries battle with romantic notions that hinder solid business tactics. Peter Drucker's famous line, translated in many and varied ways, "What can be measured can be managed," is a critical element in direct-to-consumer business and in no way limited to DTC, as it is critical in all business strategy. In winemaking, or rather the trade of winemaking, there's a great tendency to be more heavily weighted on the beauty of the product, the romance of the experience, and the satisfaction of an event. I like to suggest that these things are the requirements to begin your tactical approach, but your tactical approach must be set these elements aside as assumed requirements. I used to say when a winemaker would interview with me that it's assumed that you make great wine. We're just going to set that aside, because the business of doing your job is you must do that, but now it's managing a staff, it's hiring and firing, it's developing systems of measurement, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all assumed requirements. All of the strategies for business launch, product and branding development, marketing approaches, geographic market targeting, et cetera, must be based on measuring specific data and not just the demographics of what and who we assume our wine sales targets are. This is where we need to get into a few definitions. All right, well, these terms, demography, analytics, and segmentation, I know we're all being bombarded with this new world, and it's so new that most of the academic world is behind because of the necessity of the development of curriculums, et cetera, and programming, is that the business world is more ahead than the academic world. So the speed by which we're going through this is really a demanding academic internally for each one of us individually trying to run a business. So it's been stated very well that he who defines wins. Today, with this bombardment of the redefinition of terms based on these technologies, like it or not, we are somewhat dependent on these new technologies. We were introduced to cookies just a few short years ago that began an education for many of us as to how search engines and businesses were using the internet to track our purchase activities. This is all done through topical identification of our purchase patterns and probability indexing to make suggestions for us topically and categorically. The use of cookies was for many businesses an introduction to the larger topic of analytics, but more importantly, the broad topic of intelligence and the use of big data. I have a wonderful and brief presentation on the definitions of these terms, but suffice it to say, for this presentation, most of us are either savvy to or are beginning to understand that there is a vast amount of data and information available to us. The key is discovering simple mechanisms to read or interpret this data so that it can be applied simply. And of course, we're talking about the application to develop branding. So again, I'm not going to get into whether or not there's a higher recognition or propensity for a consumer of different types to go for a critter label or some other design. What we want to talk about is how you approach the designing topic and as a target market that you're designing to. So demography, as the study of statistics of human populations, is generally focused on the individual recipe components of an individual or group of individuals, such as you make 75 grand a year, or you're Caucasian, or you whatever. It's these individual recipe components. more precisely, statistics of race, income, education, family size, and studies of hard statistical information. In comparison, analytics is the study and dissemination of meaningful or useful patterns of data that can be used to anticipate human response mechanisms specific to our use in analytics and marketing data applications. The application of web data analytics are becoming widely used and popularized as services such as Google, Facebook, and many organizations who track internet usage by individuals as well as organizations such as VinTank and other monitoring social spaces for companies. I like to refer to analytics as the micro measurement that can be compared to benchmark data for performance evaluation of exact movements of consumers using social media. This is where we begin to discuss the topic and well-defined segmentation systems that explain so much about specific people that is already known without web usage analytics. For decades now, segmentation has been utilized by businesses and governments to track, respond to, and provide specific information about specific people types to businesses or civil governance. Many people use the term segmentation to mean something slightly different, but in general, we're going to refer here today to behavioral and lifestyle segmentation. Why I use the term tried, tested, and truth of segmentation is that most things about us, all of us, are already known in such an intimate and detailed way that everything about what we do, what we're most likely to consume, what we like, where we like to shop, what we like to read, who and where we like to spend our time is known in such a sophisticated way that micro elements of measurement by way of web analytics is like a cherry on top of information that we already have access to. There are many segmentation systems, all of which are now competing in a very aggressive way. ESRI's global mapping system, they call Tapestry, is their segmentation system. Nielsen's Prism, of course, many of us monitor through Nielsen scan programming to determine, how well our brands are doing. But Nielsen's now moving very quickly in the segmentation business with a system they purchased called Prism. Experian's Mosaic, Acorn, and others, all with 60 to 75 human classifications that all cross over with similar character profiles. What is important here is that every one of us in the U.S. has already been classified, and the information about us, with mathematical preciseness, is known based on thousands of input mechanisms. Each one of us has a recipe in which we fall into one of these 70-plus categories of consumers in the U.S. What is phenomenal about this is that each of us already has established buying patterns, likes, dislikes, tastes, cultural leanings, and a myriad of other habits that are already known. Segmentation is literally, and please note this, is literally the fastest way for you to truly understand who your target market is and then be able to identify that same target segment in every market in the U.S. So now we need to determine who our targets are before we design, and there's many questions about, well, I have a design already and I need to now learn how to better market that design or better create consistencies within my branding. Well, we'll talk a little bit about this. So I want to talk about understanding your customer and speaking their language a little here. Most of us are already collecting consumer data information, of which many times is only part of what you will need to identify your target segments. We're encouraged to always get the emails of our customers or target consumers, and I would agree that if nothing else, at least gain access to this one single data point to communicate with customers or potential customers. A residence location of a qualified customer is your most important piece of information, and that's not generally what we're asking for, and it's not generally something that a consumer or customer is necessarily always willing to give up, because that's getting a little close. But besides that, with this information, a residence location of a qualified customer is your most important piece of information, as you can only partially segment that customer without it. Again, every single one of us is already identified with a segment. All Fortune companies use this information to target us already. Our civil governance uses the same technology to market to us even political and civil governance methodologies or philosophies. Many new analytics systems are using the term segmentation, but are creating new definitions to the already massive amount of information that exists. The first key step developing a brand strategy is that you must know who it is that you're selling to. I know you have brands already developed, and now you need to develop a strategy to sell it with greater effectiveness. We'll get to that in a minute, but for now, I want you to see that you have an existing contact list, and hopefully you're using that to collect specific information about your customers. What you have is the beginning point, and I'm making an assumption that many of you do not have sophisticated contact relationship management systems to log detailed contact information. Suffice it to say that those who will compete and succeed in the DTC space will do it, will develop these systems because they have developed and utilized their skill in social strategies through measurement technologies of segmentation and analytics. So those who are going to succeed are going to develop these systems and be able to categorize or query out information more proficiently. Mining in your own backyard begins with taking whatever information you already have and using it to find out what you now know that you need. There are a few steps to making changes or additions to how to approach your general data collection. One of the keys to developing and building consumer data is the development of a good contact relationship system. Whatever you use now, the one thing that will tell you who your target audience is the physical address and the name of your existing buyer. If you don't have this information, you will need to begin the process of developing this information. Usually, once a business commits to this, you will begin to gain the benefits immediately. But just as the development of any database, the power of data is cumulative. The real changes will be seen logarithmically over the course of time, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. But once you start, they will build up and you will gain greater access and a greater understanding. You can gain great insights with even as little as 150 to 300, what I'll call free will choices of one of your existing brands. What I mean by this is that if you have someone who is making a decision to buy your particular brand, either by choice with other choices available or by regular buying patterns, that information is both critical and powerful in creating patterns of purchase with exact customers that you now can perform a segmentation analysis. Mining this information from wine club memberships is one of the ways of performing this analysis. It's already a pre-qualified reference to purchase patterns. For example, if you have a club member, particular people now can be segmented as this is a free will purchase, as opposed to this is a consumer that comes into your tasting room and buys a bottle of wine and there's only one choice to make concerning brands because you only carry one. There's a difference in how reliable the information is, whether there is a single bottle purchase or a multiple bottle purchase. A single bottle purchase in a general retail environment is a more powerful purchase indicator of brand resonance to a particular segment than a tasting room purchase because of the vast majority of brands to choose from. They're making a free will choice, and if you can gain access to that person, their physical address, you can segment them. But a case purchase is a very reliable indicator at a tasting room of brand resonance, of which that person is a key target of the segmentation process. So the foundations of brand strategy are now set. So we're going to assume now, you've gone through this process of identifying who your consumers are. And there's a lot of work involved here in one way, but it's not so overwhelming that it should be intimidating. It's just a kind of a step-by-step thing that you've got to go through to understand who your markets are. And I'm going to get into some of the brand building techniques that I went through over the last dozen years or so that I found very effective. The foundations of brand strategy are set because you have done all this. You must know who your target audience is, and it should never be simply by a demographic indicator of income or race or education, etc., although there are common threads in general proclivity or propensity for wine consumption in all sophisticated segmentation systems. Let's start jumping now into practical applications of target marketing and the alignment of brand and media assets. For many of you, this is something that you practice very regularly. That is, alignment of color schemes, logo crossover in varying media, general consideration of style that ties seamlessly from one type of media to the next. The simple reference is a stationery set where the business cards, letterheads, fax templates, envelopes, etc., are all aligned in design and relative format. With all the new types of media that we utilize, we must now consider every social space, every printed asset, neck hanger, POS, sell sheet, etc. I want to quickly say that what I see many times is that new media spaces are developed, and then as each asset is being added, there is a disconnect in design and format, commonly with the thought of making improvements. This is something that you will want to go back and evaluate as a key point of general branding, of which is part of a great brand strategy. So now we're going to talk a little bit about designing to targets and targeting from designs, which if you don't have a brand, as you begin to understand this, designing to targets would be that now you know who your targets are and you're going to design your first brand to a specific target that you're trying to sell to. For most of the wine industry, the need for a paradigm shift is very real and necessary. Not a total change, but a shift in how we think more efficiently before we act. Whether you are thinking about developing a secondary brand or going through a redesign of your existing brand, you are now learning about how to create a brand strategy in alignment with the segment that your company has newly identified. At this time, you may want to consider altering or redesigning your brand to better resonate to that particular target. But one warning here, abrupt alterations or radical redesigns that come all at once have a detrimental effect to your brand. Many of you already know this, maybe you've experienced this. And I've seen huge drop-offs in sales followed by a redesign. When redesigns are undertaken, vast departures of redesigns need to be considered carefully with extreme caution. And when doing so, they're done a little at a time so that the original flavor of the brand is always obvious in the redesign. Okay, so now you have a target audience. If you truly want to create a brand strategy, you're going to have to go deeper into who it is that you want to sell to. In no way do I want to suggest it's a simple task, but to do it effectively, changing the way most suppliers move through the process of redesigning, you want to start by taking one particular segment and designing to that segment, even as a practice. So without getting into the real life scenario of your business, take your graphic artist or the person you're working with. Choose a segment, begin to understand these segmentation systems and say, this is a segment, I want to learn more about them, and I want to design the design to them and work with your graphic artist to do this. This is 90+% of the time, this is not done in brand development in the wine industry, and it makes such a vast difference. I want to note here that every fortune thinking consumer products organization goes through this process, and it is one of the reasons why they are fortune organizations. It all starts with, I can think like a Fortune 500 company. Let's take an existing brand of, say, one of my customers called Stonehenge. The brand has a historic, clean, classic look with soft white cotton linen and an embossed vineyard estate watermark type scene. It is balanced with all art and text centered with a border. It's a common classic style. We took the mailing list and the direct shipping list of all the existing sales records and shipments and categorized them by brand type, and then ran a segmentation analysis to determine what segments would index high in probabilities for purchasing this brand. We discovered, actually to our surprise, that the highest indexing group was a group that other than what the brand original owner designed over 15 years ago, it wasn't an upper middle class boomer aged couple as the classic design might indicate a relatively conservative target. But on the contrary, the highest indexing group was a group that were described as young urban dwellers. That showed 7 times greater likelihood of buying this brand mathematically in this analysis than any other group types. And this was about 200 plus, a slice of about 200 plus customers and their buying habits. This is where we begin to understand that we need to start flying by our instruments, i.e. our data, rather than simply our opinions, likes, or dislikes, or what a graphic artist throws at us and simply gives you 3 choices, you like this one, you make a little adjustment. But it's just simply by what's off the top of our heads many times. I want to quickly read a list of the attributes or recipes of this group before I go on. This particular group of young urban dwellers is described as younger and middle-aged singles living in city neighborhoods. More than 90% are unmarried. Most are in their 30s and 40s, white and childless, part of a demographic trend of delaying marriage while living alone or cohabitating with a partner. While economic insecurity is one of the reasons some singles avoid marriage and children, these young professionals report above average incomes topping $75,000 a year, and they seem to be thoroughly enjoying their unattached status, quote unquote. Take, for example, that to simply make assumptions that this particular group might like particular visuals or design attributes, many times leaning towards edgy or totally modern, these people obviously had an influence on what they thought was a wine product they would enjoy or like to show their friends while entertaining. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't go for edgy, but the fact is that they seem to want to show class in their wine consumption purchases, and this label was something that was classy in the historic purchase patterns of the last generation, quite possibly being influenced by their own family or their parents as to what classy wine products should look like. I would love to stall here and take several hours of explanation for, quote, applications of effectiveness to communicate and sell to the personality attributes of a segment, but we'll have to come back to that on another day. Needless to say, it is an extremely interesting journey to embark upon this whole new world of brand taste based on factual measurements rather than assumptions. And in fact, wines that are branded with a little bit of an edgy feel to them, like The Prisoner, say, actually resonates to the 40s and 50s set of retired radicals, meaning that this group has laid down most of their rowdy days history. The group remembers those days and is at a point in their lives they can afford to purchase $35 bottles of wine, and this brand has a high index for upper middle class baby boomer. Part of applying this information is that we make identifications. We can not only design more in line with who our targets are, but we then can actually map them out in every major and minor market in the U.S. Wine Concepts uses a proprietary mapping called FlexQuad that outlines a market in 1 square mile quadrants and digitizes particular information about the target consumer as well as the target retailer business, and then mathematically indexes the lowest and highest risk areas of the market where time, travel, and energy would be expensed. Once you discover the power of actually knowing who your customer is in, say, Newport, Rhode Island, you'll be able to go as deep as you want, all the way to the identifying the exact person and an exact address, which is now taking your data to the streets with a message that resonates to your target audience. There's much to say here regarding how to get someone's attention and then what to do with it. And I always use this example of you're walking by a New York City storefront and your eye is caught by bright pink fur coats in the window. And looking past the attention grabber is usually the warm, earthy tones of tans and browns in the store displays that draw you in to take a closer look. Well, I'm just going to try and quickly get through the brand and portfolio options. And there are various strategies. There are just, 100 ways to skin this cat. But let's get to some meat real quick. Looking at a few ways to differentiate or diversify your approach to brand development is, first of all, most of you have existing brands seeking to build more powerful strategies to market and sell those brands. Most commonly, brands are launched with a single brand or single identity with multiple SKUs. Whether this is a family brand ideal, such as the brand Maggio that I designed for the Oak Ridge Winery, or a single SKU concept varietal brand like OZV Old Vines Infidel. Most wine businesses begin with a particular intent and then evolve. I can't stress this one component that the greater effort of your business exerts on foundation laying, planning, and analysis, the less change you will see in the evolution of the plan, production ideals, and marketing direction. I did say less change, as most companies observe the changing environments in their markets and industries and inevitably make adjustments to strategy. Generally, this means either brand extensions, which I can't stand. I won't get into the reasons why right now, for the existing brand, or portfolio additions of new brands. Single brand or category strategies come in many shapes and sizes. One strategy by one of my customers is an Italian varietal portfolio under one winey brand name. A recent change in their portfolio was an addition of a Chardonnay because of an overwhelming request that came through the 2 wine tasting rooms they operate. Of course, Chardonnay is produced in Italy, but not generally seen as an Italian varietal program. So the wine production value added an Italian-focused varietal Malvasia as a blender into the Chardonnay, which gave it a kind of an Italian flair, and an Italian fanciful name was attached to the varietal to align with the overall brand values. one of the tips here is to be consistent, straying off a course, especially production and design values that are not in line with who the market recognizes you to be is a dangerous direction with single brand or category strategies, different for other strategies. But originally, take for example the Ravenswood brand, a very specific and particular focus on Zinfandel production. It aligned all of its focus and attention on the Zinfandel grape and expanded with vineyard designates that enhanced its growing reputation in Zinfandel production. It became known as the world leader in Zinfandel production. Of course, it laid the pattern or the carpet out for many great Zinfandel brands these days. It doesn't mean that other varietals aren't produced and done well, but all the focus and identity evolves around Zinfandel, and there's no confusion there as to what the message of the brand is. Another brand strategy is to focus on multiple target audiences and design to several audiences the packaging and brand assets that will resonate with several. If you only choose a few segments that are relatively similar, you can get away with single designs, but if you choose to approach multiple segments, generally you'll design specifically to a broad audience through one or more brand. When I stated broad segment and narrow flavor profile, I'm referring to a strategy that takes into consideration the fact that the more diverse and complicated you develop your strategies, the more complex your financial strategy and commitment becomes. When I use the term narrow flavor profile, it is that you can design to many segments but diversify very little in your style so that you keep your production values down. This is roughly the strategy I used in the development of several brands where the flavor profiles were either exactly the same, but the uses of the different brands and the packages and price points varied to target different audiences. For example, the OZV brand was duplicated in another brand that was controlled or dedicated to a large U.S. wine.
The OZV and the dedicated chain brand targeted two completely different target groups, but the flavor profile was one that was resonating with many segments, so it was duplicated. The same style of flavor or character design was developed into another brand called the Three Girls brand. Now, the Three Girls did not have a Zinfandel SKU in the brand itself, but the style of wine was a similar style that was uniquely Cabernet and Petit Syrah rather than a Zinfandel, but the same stylistic expression of oak and concentration and fruit was very similar. But it was designed to target a completely different segment in the branding elements. We don't have time to really go into the details of the additional brands that were in this particular strategy, but suffice it to say that there were similar styles of wine packaged differently for other targeted audiences. This term, deep diversification, is relative to a long-term, multiple brand, even multiple portfolio strategy that takes years of implementation and is part of a larger business diversification strategy. It includes cross-segment branding, multiple brands with similar flavor profiles, targeting different segments, as well as different market applications. It involves differing appellations and varietal and stylistic approaches to production with a purpose of broadening the target range of consumer targeting with offerings in many segmentation categories. There are many variations in between, depending on how you want to grow your distribution, how large of a goal in overall case volume, how fast you want to penetrate the markets, etc. It is all of these questions that need to be addressed in the planning and strategy process. Branding strategies begin with identification of particular segments of people groups and ends with analyzing the effectiveness of your applications. This is critical. Let me state this again. Branding strategies begin with identification of particular segments of people groups and ends with analyzing the effectiveness of your applications. Everything in between is the design elements, the particular nuances of color and patterns and textures and etc. and package styles. Branding strategies utilize analytics as a tool, but I believe that this comes in more powerfully in measuring the performance of your approach to target consumers than it does in the developmental stages of branding. Both are necessary to plan and strategize and complete and succeed in a successful brand launch. Well, that does it for my part of this today. I hope you come and visit Wine Concepts at www.wineconceptsintl.com. I want to thank the Direct-to-Consumer Wine Workshops and Sandra Hess for this great program she has put together for the DTC Wine Workshops, and look for us together at the symposium in January, as well as more seminars like this one coming up with some of the other DTC consultants, and you'll be able to view this online after it's submitted or posted by tomorrow. Again, this is Nick Karavidas from Wine Concepts and Design. Thank you, Sandra, for the time today.